Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues. Today, we want to go ahead and we want to begin talking about directive planning. We have already done that in the last class, right? But I had asked you to go ahead and write some of the advantages and disadvantages of directive planning. So, what was directive planning? Directive planning was that planning where the government was setting some binding target for the economy. The government was going ahead and saying, look, do this in this way, do that in that way. So the government was going ahead and the government was telling exactly what should be done and how it should be done. Right now, we want to go ahead and we want to understand what are going to be the advantages of directive planning. So the first advantage that we have, that is rapid economic growth. Rapid economic growth. Now, since everything is under the government, right? The government is setting the target. The government has to achieve that target. Everything is under the government. Therefore, there will be rapid development, especially in core and heavy industries, right? So this accelerates GDP growth through planned investment, especially in core and heavy industry, right? Secondly, this can lead to industrialization, right? Just something that happened during the first 5-year plans of India. So, first few 5-year plans, right? So, since everything was under the government can go ahead and tell you that, I want to go ahead and I want to focus on the capital intensive sector, or I want to focus on the large scale industries, or I want to go ahead and do something like this, right? So, you can go ahead and you can promote capital intensive and large scale industries to build strong industrial base, right? To build strong industrial base. So that transition that we need in any economy, that we should be going ahead and we should be shifting from the agricultural to the manufacturing sector to the service sector, it can be rapidly taken by the government, right? So transition becomes easier. Right. Third beta, full employment. Full employment. You can ensure that the labor is fully utilized. You can remove disguised unemployment because now everything is under you, right? You can ensure those policies which lead to employment generation, right? And then you can actually generate employment for people and make sure that everyone is employed, right? So there will be full utilization of labor, right? Full utilization of labor, and you can direct resources to employment generating sector. right? Both reduce inequality and inequity. So you can ensure that now, because everything is under the government, you have a better, better picture in place where there is more equality among people, where income is distributed in a better way, where wealth is distributed in a better way. And whenever there is inequality, right, there can be state intervention, right? So achieve more equitable distribution of income and wealth through state intervention, right? And redistribution policies and redistribution policies. Now, not only you remove inequality, but you can also, have elimination of poverty, right? So fifth, elimination of poverty. Just understand now, everything is under the government. The money is completely under the government. So if the money is completely under the government can, do some state-led development. The government can bring certain programs, right? The government can do things to ensure that the poverty is eliminated, right? The government can, direct towards rural and marginalized populations, right? The government can do the right kind of, the right kind of, uh, the right kind of programs can be brought in to ensure that inequality is removed, to ensure that you have poverty getting removed, to ensure that you have full employment, to ensure that marginalized population is helped, to ensure that you have regional development. Right? So please write down. Target poverty through state-led development program and subsidies, often directed at rural and marginalized population, right? Then you have balanced regional development, right? You need to reduce the inter-regional disparity. You need to help the backward class. And that can be done if everything is under the government, right? Then seventh, control over private sector and market failure. Now just remember, but one form of market failure is monopoly also, right? And monopoly is not good for the welfare of the people. It leads to deadweight loss. It leads to less social welfare, right? So you can curb monopoly. You can curb black market. You can curb exploitation through price controls. Like it happens in the opaque countries. They control the prices, right? You can correct the market failures, right? Through state actions, correct the externalities, provide the right kind of public goods. So all that is possible under directive planning. right? Okay, eighth, self-sufficiency and reduced import dependence. Like it happened with India during the independence period. So once we got independent, we realized that it is equally important for us to become self-sufficient. Of course, now we have understood it in great depth, right? And that's the reason we keep talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? And uh, just that when we are recording this lecture, I'm not sure if you're aware of the comment passed by Donald Trump, right? And the policies followed by US on import, right? The amount of tariff that they're charging from in whatever is getting imported from India, right? But that's not even enough. The comments of Trump for India, they are extremely demeaning, right? And I don't want to talk much on. I mean, as I said, you always have to be diplomatic on the policy part. But I just want to go ahead and I want to say that under certain situations, right, it is important for a country to show how self-independent it is, to show how self-sufficient it is, and to have reduced import dependence, to lower the amount of dependence on other countries, right? So this is something which can easily be achieved under directive planning, isn't it? Then you have social justice and welfare. To ensure basic services like education, health, housing, right? To protect the vulnerable groups through public distribution systems, right? To ensure that never ever there is a time where people don't get access to food. You always have food in your warehouse. You always have a good public distribution system to give the right welfare scheme for people, right? That is what is achievable under directive planning. Okay. Next, long-term strategic planning. Long-term strategic planning. So if you have something in mind which you want to achieve over a long term, like 5-year plans, it was a long period, right? Every 5 years you had something in mind. So those coherent development strategies which you want to achieve over a multi-year period can be easily done through directive planning, right? Okay. Now, what are some of the examples of directive planning? The first, Soviet Union, right? Classic example with rigid 5-year plans. That is something which we mimicked, we copied from them when we got our independence, right? Second, India in the 1951 to 1970, or not 1970s actually, up to 1991 throughout, you can say, to 1991 period. Not fully directive. We were following a mixed economy, but we had strong elements of directive economy, directive planning, strongly state controlled industries, licensing system, planned targets. So although we said we are a mixed economy, but we had strong state element. And China, especially before its 1978 reforms. before, right? It followed, the command economy, and there were centralized directives. It's not that now it's not there, but now it's very subsidized in China. I mean, very suppressed. I should not say subsidized. It's suppressed now. You don't see it as openly as you would see in the earlier era. With time, some reforms are there, right? Okay. So these are some of the advantages of directive planning. Now, if I ask you what are the disadvantages of directive planning, you can just write the reverse. So as I told you, you can always make advantage and disadvantage from the other one. So for example, here, there is cooperation between public and private sector, and it leads to development of private sector on its own. But under directive planning, most of the industries are under the government. So private sector does not have any freedom. कोई freedom नहीं मिलता उन्हें. Then it respects market freedom while providing policy direction. अब डायरेक्टिव प्लानिंग में मार्केट फ्रीडम को कोई रिस्पेक्ट नहीं है, मार्केट फ्रीडम को कोई नहीं देखता है, right? And the government follows what it wants to do. So under directive planning, the role of market is very limited, right? The government dictates the price. The government dictates uh, how much uh, uh, you know things will be produced and how much things would be sold, right? Nothing is under the government, under the market. Everything is under the government. Then it says supports balanced development without excessive state control. So directive में उल्टा लिखोगे that there is a lot of excessive state control. There is license system. The ease of doing business is very low, right? Then it facilitates long-term investment by reducing uncertainty. Directive में उल्टा लिखोगे, right? That in case of directive, we don't have the use of data, we don't have the use of forecast, जो indicative में हो रहा था. And at the same time, there is no long-term investment from the private sector because they are not sure of the policies of the government. Enhances resource efficiency because everything is under the government, right? And private sector is more efficient. Public is less efficient. तो उतना efficient system नहीं रहता है. Again, like it happened in India. Before 1991, the public sector was having a lot of non-performing assets, right? And we also saw that that's one reason why we wanted to privatize, right? The white collar people were bankrupt. I should say the white collar people, they were very, very lethargic, right? And they just wanted to make sure that they took the bribe and only helped the people who gave them heavy bribes, who filled their pockets, right? So therefore, we can go ahead and say that definitely there was no efficiency in the system, right? So these become the limitations of directive planning. So the advantage of one can become the drawback of the other, and the drawback of the one can become the advantage of the other. Okay. Now, coming back to where we started with, तो जब हमने ये डायरेक्टिव एंड इंडिकेटिव पढ़ना शुरू किया था बेटा, हम एक्चुअली पढ़ रहे थे कि 3 तरीके की इकोनॉमीज में कैसे हम काम कर सकते हैं, कैसे प्लानिंग काम करती है. और उसमें हमने शुरुआत की थी by going ahead and by writing about the first kind of economy, which was the capitalist economy, right? So if you notice, we had started talking about planning in capitalist economy, right? I am going to begin from there, right? This is my part, planning in the capitalist economy, right? So come back and see here, beta. Okay. In this system, planning is more indicative in nature. Mane, you leave things to the market. It's democratic in nature. And in this system, so please write down that in this type of planning, State intervention is limited to formulation of plan, adoption of indirect control. Right? The state can only issue guidelines and not directive, leaving it to the market forces to decide their course of action. Right? The absence of policy instruments that are able to ensure overall and individual industry target growth rate and firm shares are met limits the effectiveness of this type of planning. So what we are saying, beta? We are saying that the policy instruments are not, directive in nature. They're only indicative. They're not commanding. Because they're not directive in nature, therefore, a lot of times we see that you're not binding any target कि यार GDP इतना ही चाहिए, इतना ही होना चाहिए. You're not doing that. So a lot of times you tend to see that people, individuals, industries, country as a whole, they miss their targets because these are only guidelines, right? These are not directions, right? You are allowing the market to decide its course of action, right? And therefore, there are chances that the target may not be met, right? Now, the second kind of economy that we have is socialist economy. Socialist economy. We have already discussed this, that in socialist economy, you have control. So you can bring imperative planning or directive planning, right? And you have to work on the welfare of all people together, right? And you can set a particular target which can be binding. And then you can work to fulfill that target, right? So in the system, planning is of imperative type. It is totalitarian in nature, right? And works on the basis of directions, right? It sets target for production units and works in the direction of fulfilling them. Works in the direction of fulfilling them, right? Okay. Now, the last one, which we should be going ahead and talking about, that is planning in mixed economy. Planning in mixed economy. Now, this is where planning is the most difficult task, क्योंकि आप completely command भी नहीं कर रहे हो, आप completely market forces पे भी नहीं छोड़ रहे हो, right? So it has to bear the stress of both the systems, the strain of both the systems, right? Economic planning has to be meaningful also. ऐसे कुछ रैंडमली नहीं बना सकते हैं, बाइंडिंग टारगेट्स भी रखने हैं, पर बहुत ज्यादा बाइंडिंग भी नहीं रखने हैं, क्योंकि मार्केट फोर्सेस को भी अलाउ करना है टू वर्क इटसेल्फ, राइट? सो यू हैव टू गेट अ जुडिशियस मिक्स ऑफ द टू, right? State has to adopt proper mixture of direct and indirect control, right? It cannot just give the impression that okay, I exist, but do whatever you want. ये भी नहीं कर सकता. And it cannot afford to be too rigid, afford to be too strong for people, right? So it has to maintain a balance between the two. So write it with me. In this system, planning is the most difficult task, right? It may have to bear the stress and strains of the two systems. On the one hand, economic planning should be meaningful, right? It has to be meaningful. It needs to add something, right? But it cannot be completely imperative in nature. There has to be a judicious use of both, or you can say there has to be a judicious mix. It makes more sense. There has to be a judicious mix of both the plannings, right? The state has to adopt proper. So the state should be using some direct control also and indirect control also. So it has to adopt proper mixture of direct and indirect control, right? So on the one hand, It cannot give impression of mere existence. And on the other hand, it cannot afford to be too rigid either. To be too rigid either, right? So I hope this is clear to you as to what are the kind of planning which we follow in different type of